MotoGP riders can brake later than any F1 driver could imagine. Imagine you're at the Circuit of the Americas in Austin, Texas. You're on a MotoGP bike doing 345 kilometers per hour, and then you need to brake to 65 kilometers per hour, and you've got 300 meters to do it. And doing this in under 6 seconds. MotoGP riders do this with 2 fingers only. They're not using their foot, they're not pushing hard on a brake pedal. But F1 drivers on the same corner can stop faster at the exact same track. The F1 cars brake harder in a shorter distance, and they pull more G-forces in their car as well. So why is a MotoGP rider fighting something that the F1 driver never thinks about? Hi, I'm Tim from Ride Along Trackside. Today we're going to look at 3 different areas. Firstly, why does 2 wheels affect the entire physics of the race? The machinery for a MotoGP rider isn't working with them the same way that an F1 car is working with an F1 driver. Then we're going to look at what happens inside a MotoGP rider's body when they're braking down from over 300 kilometers an hour down well below 60-70 kilometers an hour. And finally, how do they brake? It's the carbon brake discs themselves from Brembo. We're going to take a closer look at the tech that's behind those. You have to look at the difference in the vehicles that are being driven around COTA. An F1 car has 4 really wide tires, so they have a lot of contact with the ground. With all of the aero that's on an F1 car, when it brakes and the car is pushed into the ground, there's a lot more traction that's being generated. And so an F1 car can use all of that extra grip and traction to turn faster into a corner. Plus, an F1 driver is strapped in really tightly inside their cockpit. On a MotoGP bike, there's only 2 wheels. And when they're braking with the lever, there's all that still front motion pushing the bike forward. It actually wants to work against the rider themselves though. They're not strapped in. The tires are narrow compared to the big wheels on an F1 car, and there's not the same aero that the car has on a MotoGP bike. So when a MotoGP rider is coming in with their full braking momentum and everything's pushing forward, the bike actually wants to flip. The back wheel starts lifting up with all that pressure coming in and the limited grip. And the front tire actually is the pivot point as someone wants to turn the corner. So you have a lot of pressure coming forward onto that small contact patch where you're actually trying to turn the bike as well. So the limit is not just the braking power that they might have, but it's the physics of how a bike turns around on a contact patch that's not much bigger than the palm of your hand. Brembo did testing at Mugello, and they saw that they could brake from 355 kilometers an hour down to 90. So it's not the braking power that's necessarily the limitation, it's everything else that a rider has to deal with when it comes to physics. And when you look at what's physically happening in the cockpit of an F1 car versus a MotoGP bike, is that when they're strapped in and they're pushing to a corner, they're going to brake as hard as is possible on the track and then turn as quickly as possible into that corner. The F1 car is pulling up to 5, sometimes 6G coming into the corner, but they can actually take that because they're strapped in to the car and they have very strong necks because of that. They're being pulled to the outside of that corner as they turn. And it's really that mental game that F1 drivers are thinking of in order to optimize every corner, every braking point to make the most of what the car is giving them. The athletic toll on a MotoGP rider is higher because they're not strapped in. On the bike, they're sitting on it, they're holding with their hands onto the handlebar, and they're gripping with their entire body. Their core's engaged, their thighs are gripping to the fuel tank. The feet are holding on to the foot pegs on that bike as they turn. And as they brake, all that forward momentum is being pushed into their wrists while they're holding onto the bike trying to turn it. And when they're hitting that 2G of force coming into a corner, they're also trying to pivot the bike at the same time as on the same spot where they're actually making all of the braking. So trying to manage that lap after lap as there's tire degradation and as they use fuel, is really quite difficult. There's definitely the mental game and then the physical game as the bike conditions change throughout the race as they're trying to manage braking and turning at the same time. I know myself, if I'm trying to turn a corner on my motorbike, if I brake too late, then I might not make the corner and I could go off the road. So I can imagine trying to get the right braking point in order to turn the corner at the right time and stay on track. I'm grateful for the Brembo brakes on my bike, but I can only imagine the requirement and need and love that each MotoGP rider has for their brakes and all the tech that goes into those carbon discs that allow them to stop so quickly coming into any turn, left or right. Now, MotoGP didn't stipulate which tech or which brake brand they needed to use on their bikes, but everyone chose Brembo. Each disc is between 320 and 355 millimeters, and they're under a kilogram each. What's crazy to think about is where they operate. So if you were to use these brakes on a normal bike on normal road settings, they wouldn't actually work because they need to be heated up to over 250 degrees Celsius. Once heated up, they can do amazing things. And then if they go over 850 degrees Celsius, they start to degrade too much. So what you might notice on warm-up laps before MotoGP races and sprint races is that they're trying to warm up the brakes so that they'll actually work coming into the first corner of the race start. The pads they use are 50 grams each, so less than half of what it might be on a road bike. And the combined lifespan of these brakes and pads are only 1,000 kilometers. Each set of those Brembo brakes cost more than pretty much any bike that you or I would buy. They're more than $20,000 a set. Interestingly, F1 also use Brembo brakes, but there's not the same physics. They're not about to flip the bike if they overbrake. So for F1, they're looking to just brake as hard as possible, depending on what the track will allow them to do. So let's recap the difference. We'll look at COTA, F1 versus MotoGP for braking. F1 at COTA, the lap record is around 1:36, and they're braking for 18% of the lap. Braking G-force is about 4 to 5 G, and the top speed is around 330 kilometers per hour. Whereas a MotoGP bike is 28 seconds slower at COTA, with the lap record sitting at around 2 minutes 4 seconds. And here's the big difference. They're braking for 23% of the lap. G-forces are sitting at around 2G, but the top speed is actually higher at over 345 kilometers an hour. So F1 cars can go faster around the lap because of the cornering, whereas the MotoGP bikes are actually faster in a straight line on that track. And the difference comes down to the physics of the bike versus the car. There's only one contact patch and it's small. It's only the size of the palm of your hand. They don't have the same downforce. There's no harness keeping the rider on the bike like there is in an F1 car. And their body has to do a lot of the work in order to move the bike around corners, whereas in an F1 car, they are strapped in. It's definitely harder on a MotoGP bike racing around a track than an F1 car overall, but they're both athletes in their own rights. So I wonder if knowing this changes your opinion of braking and racing on F1 versus MotoGP. Let me know in the comments. I read everyone.